Welcome to the Andy Staples Show and happy birthday to America. Ari Wasserman, we got a lot to process here. The last time we talked was the emergency show. USC and UCLA are going to the Big Ten. Holy cow, everybody freak out. And I feel like we're in sort of this holding pattern of there's not much to talk about because behind the scenes, there's a bunch going on as different entities that were not ready for this to happen are now processing it and deciding what their next move is.
Yeah, I was listening to our last show with me, you, Scott, and Max, and boy, that was all over the place. And I think the reason why it was is because this is such a monumental shift in like trying to digest that in a single podcast or an hour after
in real
happens,
time. This was like an hour after it happened. Yeah.
So, like, I mean, even still, what are we, 3 or 4 days removed from the news coming? That I'm not necessarily sure that I've even, completely been able to contextualize what's going on here. So, it just because of the two reasons. One, Andy, is because we don't know what's coming next, but we do feel like change is consistently inevitable moving forward. And then two, what the final product is going to look like is a huge thing to try to, understand. What are who's eventually going to be in the conferences is the baseline question, but then what's the playoff race going to look like? What does a perfect season going to mean in the future? All sorts of different things that, college football is just going to look completely different, and trying to figure it out, as we do it is a very, very hard task. So,
well, and that's the thing. I had some people asking me about the playoff and what does this mean for the next playoff format. And I don't know. I have no idea because I don't know what the conferences are going to look like in 2024, much less 2026.
Yeah, and like also too, you have this idea of like what a perfect college football season looks like, or a national championship season, what it looks like now. It's like, is there a possibility that a national champion in 2035 will have 4 losses?
Yes. Oh, I think I can answer that with an emphatic yes. The direction that it's going. You have the direction it was going before, even if it was going to be the structure we kind of remembered. But then you also have this, acceleration of what we think is a consolidation into 2 mega conferences, essentially. And that's where I'm at, Ari. I'm done with anything that kind of preserves the old system. Not because I want the old system to go away. Again, we've talked about this. I don't like the fact that a lot of fan base are going to get cut out of this thing. But if the Big Ten will just turn around and gut its longest standing partner, I don't think these people care about your tradition. They don't care about if a small group of people is going to be sad about this versus a larger group that may watch these games.
Well, how big is that portion of people? Is that a small group to you?
Like it's a lot of small groups that could add up to a very large group. And I'm not sure how cognizant of that they are. I think they're just looking at this as, okay, if we can get audiences like Ohio State, Michigan for Ohio State, USC, or for Alabama, Texas, or Georgia, Oklahoma, I don't think they're caring about kind of the national fabric of college football. I don't think that's their concern at all. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done all this.
And we talk about the national fabric of college football. And I don't know, maybe the NFL is the best example of people watching games that they don't have a team in.
Yeah.
But like college football is a sport that's consumed majorly by people that don't have a dog in the particular fight that's on TV.
Yeah.
And it's like a Texas Tech, and I'm just making up Texas Tech, but a Texas Tech fan would watch Georgia Clemson if it was nationally televised, right?
But if the Texas Tech fan is not as interested in Texas Tech football because Texas Tech is not
that's right. That's what I'm getting at.
At the same level, are they gone? Yeah.
Are they still going to watch Georgia Clemson when that game's on TV? So that to me is the most interesting dynamic about this whole thing, because even though
what it's a test of, Ari? It's not a test of loyalty to any of these particular brands. It's a test of loyalty to the sport of football. Like, how much do these casual fans or fans of schools that may get cut out of this thing, how much are they fans of the sport and want to see the best players in the sport and want to see the people who will be the future best players in the NFL? Because let's be honest, I know we get a lot of people that come to us on Twitter and say, well, I don't watch the NFL. I only watch college football. the vast majority of sports fans in America watch the NFL. We know that there's a huge overlap between college football and the NFL. So,
and gambling now too has made it
exactly.
much easier to watch games. I'm sitting here right now sweating the end of a WNBA game. So I'm looking at
Who's
it
playing?
on the Washington Mystics and the Connecticut Sun.
Well, that's throw out the record books.
Connecticut Sun was down by 14. I hit it live because I'm a degenerate loser. But the thing that I'm curious though about is that like Texas Tech is always going to have a football program, and I'm sorry if you're a Texas Tech fan. I'm not trying to pick on you, but that's just the example.
But this is the type of program we're talking. Texas Tech, Kansas State, West Virginia, Arizona State, Arizona, where you went to school. These are the programs that are looking at a very different future.
So is the existence of a Texas Tech fan, let's just say the two power conferences exist, because it seems like an inevitability right now. Texas Tech will still be in a conference, right? And they'll still play football. They're not going to fold up the football program. So would a Texas Tech fan have, like, as much as it would stink to not be in the power conference that it used to be in or competing in the national championship race, we don't know what it's going to look like when it does, but let's just say that they're not. But if they go to a lower division with Kansas State and some of those other guys where the football teams are still entertaining as hell to watch because we still watch them now, but they also aren't in the playoff race right now most years anyway. Right. Like, is winning a conference and being in that lower level just as entertaining to their fans, or does the reality of we will never win a national championship ruin the taste?
I think that's an interesting question because you're right. There's a trade-off. You now move into something you can probably win at, and maybe win at the highest level of whatever level that is, but it's not the highest level. And that's probably the thing that is the deal breaker.
Because Group of 5 teams still take great pride in winning their conference.
Absolutely.
But also there's still a somewhat possible chance that they could win a national title, right? Cincinnati made it last year.
Made the playoff, yeah.
So the thing that would be interesting to me is that when you say, what does the playoff system look like? Will there be access to the playoff system to teams that aren't in either of the super conferences?
I think there will be at first, because I think they're going to try this. They're going to try to make it a national thing and try to have their cake and eat it too.
Because if they do that, if there is access, then I think you could make the case that it's not much different than Texas Tech's existence in the new Big 12.
Well, let's work that out. Let's game that out. Let's say, because the only thing we have that we've seen from these people is the playoff proposal that Greg Sankey and Craig Thompson and Bob Bowlesby and Jack Swarbrick made. So let's say it's that. Let's say it's a 12-team playoff. The 6 highest ranked conference champs get in, not tied to any particular conference. It's just the 6 highest ranked. And then you have 4 byes. The 4 byes have to go to conference champions. Maybe, I know Greg Sankey said that he wouldn't support that next time around. But if that's the case, then yes, the champion of the Big 12 is always going to make the playoff. The champion of the ACC is probably always going to make the playoff. The champion of the Pac-12, or whatever we're going to call it, because they do change the number when the number changes, is always going to make the playoff in that scenario.
So new Pac-12, which I guess the only news between the last time we spoke was that they are looking to expand. And I don't know what that means in terms of who they would be targeting, but let's just say
we got to talk about that later in the show, because I do look at that as being kind of bi-directional. It's like, who wants to be the aggressor first on that one? But yeah,
let's just say that they
stayed at 10.
I think we're on the
Let's say they stayed at 10. The Big 12 became the 12-team league that that it was set to become, and nothing else changes. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but let's say that. It's still a pretty entertaining playoff and an entertaining season, I think.
Yeah. And like, if the Pac-10, Pac-12, Pac-8, Pac-14, whatever, adds a few Group of 5 programs right now that, we'll find out if that happens in the next few months. They aren't in one of the 2 super conferences, and the team that wins that new conference in 2030 still has a spot in the playoff to play against the teams that are in the super conferences. Then I think it's kind of the same thing that's already happening right now. I mean, it's like, I don't think that Stanford and Washington State and Oregon State and Arizona have any real thoughts of winning a college football playoff game right now. But as long as the door is open for them to eventually compete on that realm, I think you can save the national interest. What I think would hurt is if you created a system where the playoff was, you got two 26-team conferences and the playoff was 12 teams, and the only teams in that 12-team playoff were them. Then why would a Washington State fan want to watch a Georgia Clemson game?
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't
you
make any
almost
sense.
create a more of a Cinderella dynamic with this, but the difference is, and maybe it would be different in practice, but I think the difference you see with Cinderellas in the NCAA tournament in basketball is you only need one or two really good players. Maybe you need a little bit older roster. You need a terrible game from the other team. The depth is not the same thing. In football, it's completely different, where the team from the power conference is going to have so much more depth and so an overwhelming.
But that already exists now, though.
Oh, so no, I know it's the same thing.
So like that's
when somebody plays Alabama, when somebody plays Georgia, Ohio State, that's what they get. That's what happens to them.
And I do think that there is I think that the chance, regardless of how big that chance is, the chance is what keeps people fired up. So yes. I think that regardless of how this all pans out, and I think we all know what direction we're headed in now, I hope that the end of the road, that the teams and the fans of those teams that aren't invited to the super conferences are still somewhat included in their conferences, recognized, and all those things. Because you know what? Cincinnati made it last year, and I thought it was awesome. And Cincinnati played Alabama the same way that any of the other Power 5 teams that got left out would have. Well, so,
and what do I keep saying about the new Big 12? When Oklahoma and Texas leave and they settle on that lineup, I think it will be the most fun league in college football. Like, I want to still watch all that stuff, and I hope there are
the same way we watch the MAC.
Feel the same way, yeah.
You know, and it's funny because I might sound like a hypocrite if you remember. Like I took the anti-expand to 12 stance on this show with you, and I'm like, I don't give a crap about inclusion. Be good enough and get in.
Right.
I do give a crap about inclusion if it means completely blackballing teams from even competing in it. So Agreed. It's like all those teams that we're talking about right now aren't winning national championships in the next 10 years unless something crazy happens. I think that you would have the same amount of chances from a lower division or a different conference looking on the outside from the power conferences as you do right now. And as long as they have a reason to show up to the stadiums, a reason to hope they go undefeated, a reason to, keep faith that there was a chance that a special Cinderella season could happen to their team, I think that would still be meaningful. And I think would still keep them engaged in the whole sport. And like the thing that is the most troublesome to me is that when I grew up as a kid and I fell in love with this game was a regional sport. Right. People in the region took great pride in their conferences. The people in their state take great pride in their state and their team that bears the name of their state. Now, regionals, it's all gone now. Like, there's no more regional sport.
But the fear is that it's becoming regionalized again with two regions. Now, I realize the Big Ten stretches from coast to coast now, but it's still
don't you
really
think the SEC will too eventually?
The SEC is a Southern Conference, yeah.
But don't you think the SEC is going to stretch? I mean,
I don't know. I don't
know
see as much incentive for the SEC to stretch. Like, I don't know where they would go.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess if Oklahoma and Texas are in the South, then that counts. But still, like there is a certain this more than anybody. The SEC chants and other Southern stadiums. There's a Southern pride to it. Maybe that'll still be alive in some extent.
Football, if college football becomes unpopular everywhere else, it will still be popular in the South. And I think part of this is sort of how does audience work in 2022 and beyond? Because it's not the same thing. There's not a monoculture anymore. I was thinking about this, talking to Doug Haller, little peek behind the curtain. So I actually recorded 2 shows on Thursday that may or may not see the light of day because then this happened and it became the biggest thing in the sport. So hopefully you will hear those shows. One involving Ari and Antonio Morales talking about the Elite 11 and the quarterbacks. If nothing happens on July 4th, if the powers that be will please enjoy their holiday, then you'll get to hear that on that show on Tuesday. But the other show I recorded, and again, I hope you'll get to hear this one too, and it's not covered up by a bunch of news. But I talked to Doug Haller about the Playboy All-American team. And he did a great story on that, and how, kind of odd it was that this magazine would bring these guys together for a photo shoot, and the weird brand of Playboy. And at the end of it, we talked about how I've always wanted to do a story on the Bob Hope All-American team. They'd bring those guys together right around Christmas. Each guy would run out. Bob Hope would say a terrible one-liner, and the guy would run off. And when you were on a Bob Hope special back then, you were famous. Like, that meant you're famous. And that's the same thing. Like in America, for a long time, if you got to go on the Johnny Carson show, if you were on the Today Show, on Good Morning America, it meant you are super famous. But we are living in an environment now where they're like, do you know who Mr. Beast is?
Oh,
you've never heard of Mr. Beast, right?
Mm-mm.
If you're a 12-year-old, you know exactly who Mr. Beast is. And I only know who that is because of my kids. He's a YouTuber. He has millions of followers. He makes millions of dollars. He is overwhelmingly famous, yet we've never heard of him. Like, that would not have existed when we were kids. You were either famous or you weren't. There wasn't this level of fame. So this
what
is
does he do, this guy?
He makes, I don't know, he makes food. He pays money, lots of money for things. He's a YouTuber. It's stuff to entertain 11-year-olds. But
okay.
So the thing about it is, it may be that, because I see people asking, is this going to be like NASCAR where we're getting big and then shrunk back down to a regional sport? And I don't know the answer to that. Like, here's the thing. If, let's say, the whole sport coalesces around the SEC and the Big Ten, and only people in the Midwest and the South really care about college football, does that matter if it's enough people in the Midwest and the South?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess not. Like, I mean, I guess from a television revenue standpoint, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I do kind of like, my favorite thing about college football is that when we're all watching a game, you could be living in Fresno, California, Gainesville, Florida, or Rhode Island.
Right.
And we're all sitting in front of our computers
watching
on Twitter, watching the game at the same time, and everybody's locked in from coast to coast. And I don't know if that's like a sappy way of looking at it, but I really enjoy that. I like kind of like feeling like I'm watching the same thing that everybody else is. And maybe that exists to a certain extent in other sports. People watch Sunday Night Football, the NBA,
definitely
playoffs,
the NFL. But yeah,
but like, I would feel like it would be incomplete if the West Coast was alienated.
And
that's
maybe
it's
what
not.
I think there's more. And I'm also thinking from a business perspective, I do think there's more money to be made if the whole country cares.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is. And it's like the Pac-12 has been down for the past 4 or 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that I didn't like that the Pac-12 existed.
And
we all wanted to watch it.
Well, that was my argument when I wrote after Texas and Oklahoma decided to go to the SEC. When I wrote that the Big Ten should raid the Pac-12, that was my argument, to bring the top of the Pac-12 into the Big Ten, which would probably force them into being competitive, or give them the resources to allow them to be competitive. And then all of a sudden you would have West Coast teams that were nationally competitive. I think that's
I guess the real question is, and you have to boil it down to this, and you have to be kind of mean, but does college football lose anything when it loses Oregon State and Washington State? Does it lose anything when it loses Arizona? It's not the Pac-12. We're talking about the bottom half of the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Does it lose anything if Texas Tech isn't here? Does it lose anything if Kansas State isn't in the mix?
And I argue it does.
That are going to hurt. I do too.
I argue it does, because part of the charm of the sport, like part of what makes the sport special, like Lubbock is the place where if you are on the visiting team, you might get a tortilla thrown at you. Like, that's cool. It's a fun part of the sport.
Wish I was on a visiting team there, Get a little tortilla thrown at me.
Best thing you could have thrown at you.
Yeah.
Could you also throw some carnitas at me?
I could think of better things to have thrown at you.
Money.
Yeah.
not quarters, but like quarters. Rolls of bills would be great. So
yeah,
this is going to be a very transformative time, though, Ari, because like we were talking about on Thursday, when Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC, I saw an endpoint. You could see, okay, the Big 12 can backfill, everybody else can backfill who lost teams to the Big 12. That all makes sense. And we've seen it. I mean, the dominoes did fall. Like you saw it with the Sun Belt, Conference USA, James Madison moving up to FBS. All of that stuff was a result of that move. I don't see the end of this. Like once it starts, in hindsight, I don't know where it goes.
In hindsight, looking back at it, though, don't you think we should have known this was coming?
I mean, I wrote that this was coming.
Yeah, no, I know, but you said you could see the end of it, right? So, like, I feel like in hindsight, the SEC adding Oklahoma and Texas was basically them looking at the Big Ten and said, okay, your turn.
That's exactly what it was. And if the Big Ten had stood pat, I don't know that anything else majorly changes, but the fact that the Big Ten declared itself open for business here, that changes everything. And oh, by the way, if you're watching on the YouTube video wondering where the heck I am, this is not my normal setup. I'm at Lincoln Riley's house right now, or at least that's what my background says. That's where my background says I am. We're visiting friends. I was out fishing all day. I'm actually in their son's computer like gaming room, and so we were playing around with backgrounds. I actually have the one from Wayne's World where they're in Delaware, and I have a random beautiful living room with a grand piano. I'm in Delaware now. I've got our show logo that I can do the show in front of. But I did include one of the photos that we used when we took the tour of Lincoln Riley's house on the podcast. So, Ari, I thought you'd especially appreciate this one since
I'm ready to commit to you.
I know.
All it would take, right?
You're ready to play in the Big Ten, right?
Yeah.
You think Lincoln Riley's ready to play in the Big Ten?
I tried to upload a new virtual background for myself while you were talking about yours. And it was just going to be Cliff Kingsbury's house, but it won't let me do it while we're live. So maybe next time. I think a friend of mine from high school's father designed that house.
Wow,
dude, that's I mean, fantastic. You can picture him just sitting there, right, with his shoes off on his coffee table. You saw the picture, right?
Oh yeah, with the fireplace with the little glass cubes in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know you've made it when you got a fireplace with those little glass cubes in it.
Yeah.
That's
one day.
Truly big time. So, but Lincoln Riley now going to the Big Ten. So anybody who was saying that Lincoln Riley was leaving Oklahoma so that he could get out before they went to the SEC, well, now he's at a place where they're going to a pretty tough conference as well, where you're going to have to see Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, all that bunch.
This is still not as hard as going to the SEC.
But not as hard as going to the SEC, but not easy.
Yeah, no, it's certainly not. It's like we talked about this on the initial reaction from the news, but I am dead in the water with our bet.
Oh,
are you going to show any mercy at all, or are you just going to collect my money like a savage?
Well, the good news is I will give you some mercy, because our listener who tipped me off that you may have said $10,000 originally instead of $1,000 if USC doesn't make the playoff in the next 3 years.
You have to go back and listen to it.
Well, they listened again and they said that it was not 10. We did not agree to 10,000. We agreed to 1,000. It was very clear that we agreed to 1,000. So you're only going to owe me $1,000. So
yeah, that's not showing mercy. That's just what happened.
I'm not showing you any mercy at all.
Yeah.
Maybe what if they win the Big Ten in 2024 and make the playoff?
No, it makes me feel like they have to make the playoff next year. Like Caleb Williams will have to.
Couldn't two Big Ten teams make the playoff in 2024 with that lineup in the Big Ten?
I hope they expand the playoff to 36 teams, and then you're dead. Because that's exactly what will happen if they expand the playoff somehow. If they expand the playoff to 14 or 12 or something, and it happens in the next 3 years, which I don't even know if it's physically possible.
How are they going to find a venue? Like they have to book stadiums. There's no chance.
I'm just trying to think about what could happen to you to change the paradigm of a bet.
Well, the Pac-12, I guess, could add some members, could take some members. What do you think is going to happen? Because this is the part I wanted to talk about. Because next logical steps to me, if we had to guess, the Big Ten has to decide if it's done. Because I've seen reports saying, well, they've decided to stand pat. I don't believe that yet. I don't think enough time has passed
for the Big Ten.
What's that?
You said you saw reports of the Big Ten standing pat now?
Yes, there were some reports on Friday that the Big Ten would stand pat after just taking USC and UCLA.
I saw those too. I think that was an implication of standing pat as it pertains to Washington and Oregon. And
Mm-hmm.
I think they're kind of waiting on Notre Dame to see what happens
Right.
there before proceeding. I didn't take that as stand pat as we're done. I think that was just like we're playing our options. And I think I saw somebody tweet this, and it's true. It might have even been you. But if the Big Ten wants somebody and somebody wants to be in the Big Ten today, they're still going to want to be in the Big Ten 6 weeks from now and a year from now. So like they don't have any reason to rush this. So
Well,
the Big
what
Ten
people
doesn't
have
need
to
any more bottom feeders. I think that
Right.
if they're going to add teams, they need to add teams that bring value to the conference.
And what people have to understand is this just happened. This was news to everyone. Now, there were smart people in college sports who were hinting all along that something like this was going to come and going to happen. But in terms of actual people who knew something was going on and something was going to happen, the number of those people was very limited. It was limited to people in the Big Ten office, people at USC, and people at UCLA. So I don't think Oregon had a presentation ready for the Big Ten like on Thursday when this happened. I don't think Washington had a presentation ready. I think now they would go to the Big Ten and say, hey, we're interested. I don't know if they have. I would assume they will at some point if they haven't already. And then the Big Ten will evaluate that and decide, okay, or no thanks, we're going to stay where we're at right now, but we reserve the right to come back later. And Notre Dame is kind of a key piece here, which we don't know what's going to happen with Notre Dame. Obviously, they value their football independence. You've heard the speech on this podcast many, many times about why they value their football independence. But if they did pick one of these two leagues to join, and I do think it would be one of these two, and I realize they are in the ACC and all their other sports, and they're supposed to join the ACC in football if they join a conference in football. But my guess is if they do it, it'd be one of the two super leagues. The Big Ten would make a lot more sense for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So I am curious because you're right. I think Jack Swarbrick and Father Jenkins and all those folks, if they want to say yay or nay on it, then the Big Ten can figure out what they want to do. Because if the answer is no from Notre Dame's like, because that's like you said, the Big Ten can decide in 6 weeks that it wants somebody else too. Notre Dame can decide at any point in time that it wants to join any conference, and that conference will take it.
Yeah, I guess if you're Notre Dame, I guess it matters like what scheduling looks like if there's two super conferences. And will these super conference teams be scheduling the teams that are on the outside looking in and independent teams? Because it's like that, to me, it almost feels like Notre Dame's under pressure to react to this to make sure they don't get left behind in independence land. But I don't know. Maybe there's a way to work around the same way they have right now.
Most favored nation status that would allow Notre Dame to just call up the SEC, the Big Ten, or the ACC and say, hey, we're in football. When do we start? That same thing, I think, also would allow them, if they wanted to stay independent, even if there are two super leagues, because the SEC teams and the Big Ten teams would be like, hey, Notre Dame might come to our stadium. Awesome. We're going to sell that game out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be the correct assumption. So the thought process that I had of like, how do you salve it? Because I think we're 30 minutes in here and we probably have to talk about the Pac-12. Absolutely. Is there anything that the Pac-12 can do in your mind to salvage itself?
I think if they take the best of the Big 12, it's not a sexy league. And here's the thing.
What's the best of the Big 12? Do we even know what the answer to that is?
I mean, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor. But here's the problem with that. Which league would you rather watch? The remaining 10 teams in the Pac-12 plus the ones I just mentioned, or the 12-team Big 12 that will come after Texas and Oklahoma leave? Because I know the answer to that. I know my answer to that.
I don't know. I would rather watch the Pac-12 one.
No, I'd rather watch
Oregon
the other
and Washington.
With Oregon and Washington. But that's the big
if. Based on what if Oregon, Washington, and the four teams you just named were all in one conference, that would be better than either of the other ones. That were leftovers. Now, the question I have is, and I guess like the main response here is, if like the Pac-12 and the ACC created like a national conference where there was a West Coast and an East Coast, and then they
That
kept
would be
Oregon and
interesting.
Washington. That would be pretty cool. And then you have the South, and then you would have the Midwest. And I mean, it'd be weird that UCLA and USC aren't a part of that, but it's also weird they're in the Big Ten now. So you'd get used to it. But that would be like my only. But then, you're talking about Florida State and Miami and Clemson not wanting to be a part of the super teams, which I bet that, or super conferences, which probably
we know they want to be a part of it. We just don't know if they can
whether
be a
they
part
financially
of it.
can or
I got
contractually.
I got a copy of the ACC's grant of rights, the original one, not the one currently in effect from 2016. But what we've been told by people who've seen it is basically they just changed the dates on it. So you can go read that at the Athletic. You can read the ACC's grant of rights, the Big 12s, and the Pac-12s. And I talked to. It's funny because the attorney who actually had copies of these things, he wrote he wrote a journal article when he was in law school back in 2014, where he made public records requests of various schools and got these things. These schools have since denied most public records requests for these documents. So they're not out there. Like when I called the ACC to tell them I have a copy of their original grant of rights, the response was, "How in the world did you get that?" And then I explained there was a law student at Villanova who's now a practicing attorney who in 2014 requested it from the University of North Carolina, and North Carolina granted that request. And they're like, oh, God. It was like on the other end of the phone, you could just hear,
Yeah.
oh, they weren't supposed to do that. And so it's interesting. You can look through all that, but you can read it for yourself. If you're not an attorney, you're probably not going to know what you're reading. I certainly didn't. I actually talked to the attorney who had them because he works in mergers and acquisitions. He deals with similar contracts on a daily basis. And so he was explaining how this would work in the corporate world and how different these are from that, because they're much shorter. And actually the reason they're short is because it makes them more complicated to fight. And it would be really hard to fight one of these things. You are taking a massive financial risk if you're Clemson or Florida State or North Carolina, whoever in the ACC, and you tried to fight that grant of rights. Like your best hope is that enough schools in the league want to dissolve that grant of rights, and do something different. Because otherwise, I don't know if it's even worth the risk. Although I will say, Ari, so here's my question to you, Ari, because that thing lasts 14 more years. They're going to be making from their conference less than half of what the SEC schools and what the Big Ten schools get from their conference. Is it worth just walking away and fighting in court, and with the notion that maybe in 3 or 4 years you'll have your rights back?
Well, I mean, it's hard to answer because I don't know how much it would cost the universities to participate in that fight.
Well, I also don't know. Like, I don't know if the SEC or the Big Ten would take anybody if they didn't have their rights. Like, I don't think you could. I don't think you could sell to them if you can't guarantee that you've got rights to sell. So that question puts a pin in a lot of this stuff, because it means until something gets decided about all that, Clemson isn't going anywhere. Florida State's not going anywhere. North Carolina's not going anywhere. Virginia's not going anywhere. They're where they are. Now, let me ask you this about the Pac-12 and the Big 12, Ari. If you are the new commissioner of the Big 12, you've just come over from Rock Nation. Maybe you call up Jay-Z and Beyonce and ask some advice. Do you try?
Throw the diamond up.
That's right. Do you try to get the best of the Pac-12? Do you say, Oregon and Washington, come play with us?
Let me ask you this. If you're the Pac-12, I guess that if you're a Pac-12 or Big 12, I'm looking at a list. Do you think that obviously the Big 12 getting the two biggest brands out of the Pac-12 would be a bigger splash? But like in the Pac-12, like if they had their pick of the litter for the current group of 5 teams, could they add 2 to 4 group of 5 teams and save their conference?
I don't think so.
Are there 4 of them that are interesting enough to you? Like, which 4 would they be now that Cincinnati, UCF are off the board? Like, if they got SMU,
here's the thing,
I don't know, Nevada.
This is the other part of this, Ari. The Pac-12 presidents have always been very snobbish about their academics and about how their states, work, and do the schools match? Do the states match? Like, they're apt to say the laws in this school's state don't jive with the laws in our state, and we don't want to be together.
Yeah.
Like, that's not outside the realm of possibility. So the question is, will they change their mind on this and say, you know what? Forget all that stuff. Forget having to be you don't have to be an AAU member to get to be in the Pac-12, but look, Cal and Stanford, two of the best schools in America. Oregon, Utah, Washington, all AAU members. Like, it's going to be tough to explain to a president who's been told basically the entire time they've been in office, this place is special. We don't take just anybody. That they need to take a school that may not have the same academic reputation or comes from a state where where politically they're not aligned at all. Like, it's going to take a lot for them to change their minds on that.
Well, I mean, do you think like the upper administration of Stanford's like shitting their pants right now, or do you think they're fine?
I mean, Stanford's not going to stop pumping out really successful graduates who donate a lot of money to Stanford. So it doesn't change anything for Stanford in the long run, just like leaving the Big Ten didn't change anything for the University of Chicago in the long run, and de-emphasizing sports didn't change anything for the Ivy League schools in the long run. But I don't think they're happy about it. I think the people who are really, really messed up and not happy about this are Oregon, Washington, and Utah, where they care very deeply about how well their football teams do.
Yeah,
they've invested a lot in their
too, probably to a certain extent.
Yeah, the Arizona Students as well. But the three that I just mentioned have been successful.
Mm-hmm.
They have been proactive. They have invested, and they already didn't like the fact that everybody else didn't invest the way they invest. Now they're really pissed, probably.
Yeah, it's kind of like standing on the shore of an island, just hoping the boat comes back.
Yeah. Well, like, Utah's a great example of this, because when I did the original Big Ten should raid the Pac-12, one, I thought the Big Ten would go for Stanford and Cal, just because university presidents couldn't resist being attached to Stanford and Cal if they had the chance.
Were you smoking a pipe when you predicted that?
I thought about it. I put leather patches on my elbows when I did it. And
how do you smoke? When I see people smoking out of a pipe, how does that even work? I've been meaning to ask somebody that.
Have you ever used a bong?
Am I supposed to answer that?
I mean, it's legal, and it's not legal in your state where you live now.
Well, no, the question I wanted, I mean, I understand. I'm familiar with how they work. How's that?
You put the material in a bowl.
Yeah.
And you light the material.
And then it goes up. But it's like, what are you smoking? The raw tobacco?
Yes. Yeah.
So what's it supposed to be? Like a cigarette, but without all the disgusting toxins
the filter,
in it?
Yes. Yeah, without the filter or the paper, yes.
Why do people stop doing that?
It takes a lot of work. You have to put the burned tobacco somewhere. It smells very strong. So I'm guessing it's very difficult to do in public. And there's a lot of ritual to it that I imagine would be pretty difficult.
I just feel like it used to be very, very common to see that. And I don't think I've ever seen somebody smoking
you're thinking of the bad guy in Back to School. That's what you're thinking.
I was watching the show Staircase on HBO with Britt, and Scott Peterson, who was the main character in the show, was smoking one. I was like, why don't people do that anymore?
Like Scott Peterson, as in Scott and Lacey Peterson? Is that what that show's about?
Wait a second. That's a different Peterson thing I was watching.
Okay.
Staircase Peterson.
Gotcha.
You don't know what that show is? That's about?
I don't.
It's about some lady who either fell or got pushed down the stairs. His name's Michael Peterson, Lord. And he was an author in North Carolina, and it was about whether or not he did it. In the depictions of him, he was a big.
There's a college football case involving that as well, with a famous college football booster
falling down the stairs,
something like that.
Oh,
as they call it.
Well, you have to let me know what that's all about. I'm interested in that sort of thing.
It's all very, very intriguing, but it is another discussion for another day because we got realignment going on
my
already.
favorite thing in the entire world is bringing you into something that you have to say, well, that's a discussion for another day, because I think I've done it 3 times so far.
Well, we kind of have to stay focused on this.
Yes,
one because,
we do.
Because there's a lot of moving parts to this. But I think Utah is in a really weird spot right now because they're the one that you hardly hear mentioned when you talk about where they go. But this is a program.
They're also the most Big Ten program on the West Coast that there is.
They
literally fit
playing style.
Yes.
And also, they're an AAU member. It's a very good school, and they've been successful in multiple conferences. Like, I actually think they'd be real. And Salt Lake, huge airport, easy to get in and out of. I mean, you name it. But I don't know if they move the meter enough to get into one of these, or to be someone that somebody wants to steal.
Yeah, I've got a theory. I think Urban Meyer's going to take over Utah when Whittingham's done, and he's going to lead them into the Big Ten. Yeah,
there you go. He just calls up the folks at Ohio State. Hey, Gene, I'm going to need a solid here.
I'm going to take over Utah again.
Well, Gene Smith busy calling his alma mater, I imagine. He obviously voiced support for Notre Dame coming to the Big Ten, but then everybody wants Notre Dame to come to their league. So,
Notre Dame is the sexy girl at the dance, right?
It's the sexiest. I mean, plaid skirt and everything, because that's, they're Catholic.
Yeah, but, I got you there, bud.
I don't know. Some people may need some help with that, but
yeah.
So let me put you on the spot, Ari.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I don't think all these teams have moved in a year, but a year from now, who's going to be headed where when all this moves?
So, like, the most impossible question to answer of all time. But
I know, right?
I do think that Washington and Oregon will find their way into the Big Ten.
I think so too. And my question is, do they go even bigger with a couple more from out that way just to create? Because here's what you can do. Because this is a question that comes up a lot, and these guys get ripped for their greed. And how can you make volleyball players and basketball players and softball players and soccer players, how can you make them fly cross country on a Tuesday night, all that stuff? What if they were to have, and I'm going back to my original column that I wrote last year. What if they were to have 6 from the West Coast, 6 from the that had come from the Pac-12? And what if you just had them in the other sports? That's their league.
That'd be crazy.
But
I don't even know how that stuff works.
Like, you could have tournaments where all of the Big Ten, it would be, that would be a 20-team conference. You could have tournaments where all of the Big Ten got together in those sports. Like, we're going to have this year, it'll be in Minneapolis. This year, it'll be in Salt Lake City. This year, it'll be in Seattle. This year, it'll be in Columbus. But,
well, I mean, I was listening to Bruce and Stu, and they made the point, and it's so true. Like, football drives the bus here.
Of course.
So you make that stuff work. It's just like, I mean.
Yeah, I'm just saying you could also make the football interesting because you could make them their own division in football, but then be mixing in the old line Big Ten programs.
I think that's a really interesting thought. And I think the next question after that would be, Andy, is like, how creative are they going to get? Like, and how creative can you be? And does too much creativity scare you?
Too much creativity doesn't scare me, but I think if you and I have learned anything covering this sport, is creativity scares a lot of college football fans.
Yeah. Because they're going to have to, figure out what to do with especially if they don't add Washington and Oregon to the Big Ten. Like, how are they going to schedule those teams?
Well, and I think the Big Ten still holds all the cards. Notre Dame holds its own card, but the Big Ten holds all the other cards here until we find out whether it's possible or not to break the ACC's grant of rights. The Big Ten holds all the cards, because do they want to go West again? Do they want to go national, truly national? Which would mean going into the South, which I guess.
Have they not already? Do you have to be in the South to be national?
No, I don't think you
I mean,
do.
I guess like they're the most national conference in America now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But like the dude, like I know, like we just got done discussing the grant of rights, but I feel like the major dominoes that are still to fall in the next, maybe it might be 15 years down the road, but I'm very curious what happens to Miami, Clemson, and Florida State, which nobody's spoken about at all the last few days because of that grant of rights. So,
well, right, and everyone assumes that they would be in the SEC, and I would assume that too. I would also assume in that situation that the SEC and the Big Ten would be fighting over North Carolina.
well, I mean, if the SEC gets Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, then the Big Ten will have lost the battle in terms of which super conference is better. Well, I mean, the Big Ten is still trying to catch up because one of the teams that they took.
You're looking at it purely from an on-field standpoint. I'm not. I'm looking at it more from
program
a
brand
standpoint. What's that?
Program brand.
Yeah, I think if you can get North Carolina, if you can get Washington and Oregon, you're doing all right still.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you think UCLA carries weight because of its basketball brand, sure.
Or its football
or historical,
brand.
The historical
football
brand.
Like that beautiful uniform showing up on a Big Ten campus still means something. Even though the team's not particularly great and hasn't been for a while.
I mean, football brand too I feel like is an evolution too.
Yeah.
It's not like they look beautiful in the USC rivalry games and they look great in the Rose Bowl, but like, when's the last time UCLA's been a nationally relevant program?
It's
been
a
decade.
Time. Now,
so
they're going to argue that with the resources of being a Big Ten school, we can do that. Well, no, you have to decide you want to be that. You and I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
Even schools in the Big Ten who have all this money have to decide they want to be that.
Because Clemson, to me, we haven't talked about this at all, but I think it's an interesting discussion that we should take the next 2 minutes talking about it. It's just like, what is Clemson? Clemson is the most
it's an SEC school in culture and always has been that has happened to be in the ACC.
Right. But their brand as a football program is completely transformed in the last 5 years. Okay. So, I know they've got a Southern culture, but like their fan base is also very niche. Like, I don't think that they have a fan base that can compare to Alabama's.
Correct.
So, like,
it's a small,
from a money generating standpoint, what is that? So, like, how do you look at Clemson as a expansion candidate? I mean, do you look at
I don't look at Clemson's fan base because Clemson's fan base is not as big as some of these other ones we're talking about, just because it's a smaller school. It doesn't have as many living alumni. That said, you put that tiger paw on the field with all these other huge brands, you want to watch that game.
I know, but you just got done saying that I was looking about it too much on the field, but I feel like that, like Clemson's last 5 years on the field is what makes that tiger
absolutely
paw sexy.
Means something. No, it does.
But like, do you look at them as like a grade A addition?
Yes.
Because it's a financial discussion too, right? How many eyeballs watch the games? Obviously a ton now because they're nationally relevant. But
here's the other thing about Clemson. You put them in a league where they're going to make more money. They're going to invest that in the football program to be better.
Yeah, they're like Amazon. No profit, all reinvestment. Yeah. I mean, I like that. I mean, I personally believe that it's so funny to me because I did a story a few years ago about how hard it is to schedule 10 years in advance and like how much effort has to go into the schedule makers at these programs to look at recruiting classes and who do we think is going to be the coach then, because you don't want to schedule a game 10 years in advance and then end up with a dud on your schedule in 10 years. But it's kind of like you have to project those things as an expansion too, right? Like when you're expanding your conference, it's like if you look at Clemson and you say, hey, this team's been very, very good for the past 5 years. I mean, do you take that into account? Is that what's weighted the last 5 to 10 years?
Or since Dabo took over. I mean, they did win the league a couple times before this streak started.
Okay.
And they also won
they've always been a solid program. I'm not trying to say they were a national championship
in '81. So it's not.
But when you invite Clemson into your program, into your conference, are you inviting the top 3 program in America? Or like, is that something that you can count on in 15, 20 years? Or are you just inviting a solid program historically?
Can you count on them being a top 20 program in America?
Probably. If you can, I think that is a certainty, especially if they're able to reinvest it. Yeah.
then you invite them.
But it's like a very interesting dynamic between like UCLA and Clemson, because I feel like at certain times they've probably taken turns in this driver's seat.
I'd take Clemson over UCLA in a heartbeat right now for football reasons.
Sure, but you made it seem like the Big Ten didn't like acquiesce their way into like accepting them. Like they were. It almost feels like it was a favor to them to let them in the conference under these circumstances.
Well, they probably had to take them because they probably were kind of a tag team with USC.
Yeah, so I wonder if that's going to also be the case as it pertains to Washington State and Oregon State, if and when that conversation happens.
That will be interesting, and I know John Canzano, who does a great job out in Portland, mentioned that lawmakers in Washington and in Oregon were going to try to block any move that didn't involve both pairs in their respective states. I kind of think that's a really quick way to get primaried if you're in Oregon or Washington by a bunch of Oregon and Washington fans. Like,
yeah,
those are the bigger fan bases. They're going to be pissed if they have a chance to go to the Big Ten and they can't because you say you got to take little brother with you.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and it would be a very it'd be really bad for the rest of the sport too, because we want to see that now, right? Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess has anybody asked you this, Andy? Is all this good for college football?
Well, you've asked it, and everybody asks it.
No, but have you answered, like, what do you think? Do you think this is a positive for the game that you love?
I don't think it's a positive because, like we said, all of a lot of the fun stuff that makes it what we love, I worry that it's going to get kicked to the wayside in favor of just a few big brands. And I don't want that to happen.
And also,
like you said earlier,
is the quirkiness of the sport at risk?
Yes, very much.
Because
so.
Like, you're not going to have any more buffaloes running onto the field and all the tortillas and all the things that we love to watch. Like, if you just add I'm not saying that the big time programs don't have tradition, but like the crazy shit that happens on Saturdays every week in stadiums that you would never think to watch on your own.
The craziness will get boiled out of that super corporate big brands group.
And then if it just becomes the NFL, then it scares me. So, like, I'm hoping in my own. I mean, Chris Vanini kind of wrote this column, but I feel like most fans think this way. And that's like Ari, the hot take artist, actually thinks exactly what everybody else thinks right now. And it's just like, include as many people as you can. Don't leave anybody in the dust. Let everybody compete for the national championship, and let's try to save the sport
now
from becoming a suit in sports.
Right.
Form.
But I will say, I do think we're on the road toward more massive regular season matchups between schools that we're not used to seeing play in the regular season. And I'm good with that. I want that. I want more of that.
You want a refresh of what would be new. But then in 10 or 15 years, once it's normal, then you're left with the product still.
They can shake it up again. That's the thing. They've always shaken it up over and over and over again. And they'll keep doing that. None of this is new. Everybody thinks realignment started in 1990. It didn't. Realignment has been going on since alignment has been going on. So,
yeah,
it's changed.
It should just be alignment.
Fact of life.
Just be called alignment.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully you and I will stay aligned and we'll be able to keep talking about this, but keep listening. We're going to have a lot of discussions about what comes next, because I think there's going to be a little bit of lull in the bombshell news department. And then it's going to be,
I think it's because we're in
furious bombshells.
We're in the territory where your next move better be a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think people want to mess this up.
Yeah. I also think everybody's taking a few days to deal with what happened and then figure out what they're going to do next. So we'll see. And I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain. On Tuesday, you may hear Ari and I with Antonio Morales talking about the quarterbacks at the Elite 11. We had a really great conversation about that. I want to make sure that you get to hear it, because just because this is happening doesn't mean the rest of the sport stops. There's still going to need to be really good quarterbacks this year and next. We talked about some of the current college players who were there, a lot of the recruits who were there. So it was a fun talk. Ignore the fact that we're not mentioning that anybody committed to USC is going to be playing in the Big Ten. Like we're not mentioning Malachi Nelson as a Big Ten quarterback. But You may not hear that, because if somebody does something wild on July 4th, while you're shooting off your fireworks, then we'll be talking about that. So strap in. This is going to be a really chaotic next few weeks and months. And I realize that we're also rolling into a college football season, so we're going to be talking about that as well. But I think, Ari, this is going to be the most chaotic time in the history of the sport. And
is
that
this
is
the worst
something.
possible week for a human being to go on vacation?
No, that would have been last week. So I'm glad you weren't.
Yeah. Okay. Should I take my podcast mic to the breakers just in case?
Sure. I think you should. I was just there. Their internet's nice. So
it
I
is?
think you'll be all
okay,
right.
I'll bring it just in case something crazy happens. Because I don't like. I promised Britt that I wouldn't be working on vacation.
No. This is your de facto honeymoon, Ari. We have lots of folks here at The Athletic. I can talk to plenty of other people. You don't take your mic.
We've had a lot of de facto honeymoons. We're going to Mexico in December. We'll be okay.
Leave it sitting on your desk. We'll be okay.
No, I'm arrogant enough to want to be a part of the discussion if something huge happens. So I'm going to bring it just in case.
We do need your takes on all of these things.
Yes. So I'll bring it just in case. And like if there's some small news, then I'll sit it out. Like if Washington and Oregon go to the Big Ten, I want to let it rip.
All right, Ari Wasserman. You may or may not hear him from vacation, but you may hear him from the past on Tuesday, because it might mean that the powers that be did enjoy their holiday instead of just trying to radically reinvent the sport. We know they're going to get to radically reinventing the sport here in the next few weeks and months. So it's a matter of when. We'll talk to you again soon.